This is one of the most interesting gaming laptops on the market today, the Aorus 15P from Gigabyte, which is pretty much a cheaper but slightly thicker brother of the Aorus 15G that I reviewed the other day. So this one has the same 8-core i7 CPU, the 10870H, it has the same 32 gigs of RAM, the same 240Hz Full HD display, but then instead of a lower power 3080, this laptop comes with a high power 130W RTX 3070 that performs really well, as you will see later on. Now this exact configuration will cost you around $1,700 ex taxes or 1,900 euros with taxes here in the Netherlands, which does sound like a lot, but it's also not that bad when you compare it to some other high-end gaming laptops on the market. Anyway, let's see what this laptop can do. Let's start. This video is brought to you by SteelSeries and their Aerox 3 wireless gaming mouse. This super light mouse has a weight of only 66 grams, it's equipped with a top-end sensor, 2.4 GHz and a Bluetooth mode, and it has a nice protective coating so you don't have to worry about dust or accidental spills. Check it out using the link in the description below. On the outside, the Aorus 15P looks almost exactly the same as the 15G from my last review. It has a pretty simple and clean design with a small Aorus logo on the top cover that lights up. Now it's not RGB though, and it just looks decent in my opinion. The main difference here is that this laptop is 4mm thicker than the 15G, and then not overall, just mostly in the back, so it can provide a little bit more ventilation for that high power GPU. It is also 200 grams heavier, bringing the total to 2.2 kilograms, or a little bit more if you count the charger. Now it is made of plastic, but the build quality is actually pretty good and it's not sensitive to fingerprints almost at all. So I would say quality-wise, it doesn't feel as fancy as a Razer Blade, for example, but it is a nice step up from the MSI GF65 Thin. Now you can open it smoothly with one hand, and while the panel and the hinges feel pretty solid, the right hinge does look like it's only supported on one side, and it gives off a bit more when you press it hard. As I said in the 15G review, I cannot really judge what the durability will be like if you use this laptop for months or for years, but it is worth pointing this out and just, keeping an eye on it. Now the inside of the laptop is exactly the same as on the 15G, and I'm really happy they did that. It has nice and thin bezels, and it has a large keyboard that includes a numpad, which is a huge plus in my opinion. Now the touchpad could have been a little bit bigger, but it is completely fine and it will get the job done. The keyboard itself is pretty decent too. It's not too heavy, it's not too light. It has an okay travel with a bit of clicky tactile feedback. I also really like the font, except that they made WASD fonts bolder. I really don't think that was necessary in my opinion. Now on the left side there is an HDMI connection and a display port out. There's a 5 gigabit USB Type A port, an audio jack and an Ethernet connection. On the right side there are two 5 gigabit Type A ports, a 5 gigabit Type C port, an SD card reader and a connection for your charger. So again, this is a great number of connections, but I am missing some of those higher end ones like a Thunderbolt connection or even a faster 10 gigabit USB port. I also find it a bit odd to put the power connection on the right side where it kind of just gets in the way of your mouse. I kind of prefer having it on the left side or on the back of the laptop, but I would say it's good that they kind of made it angled and it doesn't really take that much space, so it's not a huge deal. As I said at the start, this laptop comes with an RTX 3070 that can boost up to 130 watts. Now, the actual boost of this GPU will kind of depend on the situation though. So Nvidia's dynamic boost basically determines if more power should go to the CPU or the GPU on your laptop. So for example, in a very CPU intensive game, you might see a lower wattage of your GPU than the maximum is supposed to be. Now let's see how all this translates in games. Starting with some titles that I also tested older laptops with, the Aorus 15P ends up mostly at the top of the graphs, even though these games are actually indeed CPU heavy. If I compare it to the Asus TUF-F15, a laptop with a 4-core Intel Core i7 and a 90W RTX 3070, it gets absolutely humiliated in games. Now there's a couple of games where the TUF limits the damage to about 20% gap, but in many other games the 15P is ahead by 50 or even 60+%. Now the TUF is using the Optimus feature that cannot be turned off, and the only way to do that is to connect an external monitor using a USB-C connection, and that will shrink the gap a tiny bit. But even with that, the 15P is just a class apart when it comes to performance, and it will only cost you a tiny bit more. Now when we compare it to the Asus ROG Strix G15 that has an 8-core AMD Ryzen 9, a higher power RTX 3070 and a pretty similar price tag, the 15P yet again takes the gold. It's about 10 to 30% faster in most games, with a couple of others going way beyond that. Now it is again Nvidia's Optimus that is holding back the G15, but even with an external display, the 15P is still around 10% ahead on average. Now where it gets really interesting is when we compare it to the Aorus 15G with a 105W RTX 3080. The 15G has the advantage of having more GPU cores, but the higher power limits of the 15P allow it to boost higher, so in the end that kind of seems to have won in most games. The average advantage is small and you would probably never notice it in games, but considering the fact that this 15P is supposed to be several hundreds of euros or several hundreds of dollars cheaper, it is definitely a clear winner in my eyes. If we look at the CPU performance, Intel's 10th Gen 8-core i7 is a pretty solid performer. The latest AMD CPUs are slightly ahead, but I would still say it's a good all-around processor that can do everything you realistically want from a gaming laptop. Now when it comes to the display, Gigabyte used the same factory calibrated 1080p 240Hz model as they did on the 15G, so the same conclusion applies here. It is a good choice if gaming is your primary goal. Now these are pretty fast panels that work well in both esports and AAA titles, and they're actually pretty good in terms of color as well. The color gamut is good enough for some creative work, and the factory calibration is actually pretty decent with accurate colors. If you're serious about creative work, getting a high-resolution laptop or using an external monitor might have an advantage as you would get more workspace, but if you are fine with this 1080p resolution, this monitor will do just fine. Now, similarly to the 15G, the default setting is actually really good, showing comfortable CPU and GPU thermals and actually an excellent noise level. Now, you will definitely hear the 43 decibels, but it does make it quieter than most gaming laptops I've tested so far. Setting it to turbo causes the CPU to go up in power that instantly makes it throttle and actually lowers the performance, and setting it to eco mode just drops the CPU power by a couple of watts. Now it does make it a little bit quieter, but not enough to call it silent. And if you go and actually put the fan setting to silent mode as well and try to make it even quieter, this laptop just crashes. So I really think they should look into this a bit more and give us some proper, well-planned options instead of this mess. Either way, the best thing to do here is to leave it in the default setting and it will do just fine. Now, this laptop is really easy to maintain and to upgrade. It is easy enough to open, the fans are easy to clean, the battery and memory can be easily replaced. You can upgrade the Wi-Fi chip when you need to, though it does come with Wi-Fi 6, and you can replace the current or add a second SSD if you want to. And speaking of SSDs, the one they included is pretty fast. Even though the battery is quite big, the battery life is not that spectacular, I would say. I got 4 hours in PC Mark 8 benchmark and a bit over 5 hours of just watching Netflix, so this definitely is not a work all day outside without a charger kind of a laptop. But the webcam is just useless. Okay, hi. So this is the test of the camera and of the microphone of the Aorus 15P gaming laptop. And as you can see, this angle is absolutely horrendous. Hi. Unless you're into giant hands and chins and nostrils. So I would say that it's not even good for an occasional meeting. It is completely useless. And I think it would be better if they didn't include a camera at all. There's a privacy slider though. So in my opinion, what you should do is just close it and never use it again. Bye. Now, to wrap this all up, I really think this is one of the most interesting gaming laptops of this generation. It offers excellent gaming performance, and then in a solid chassis with a nice keyboard, a good number of connections, and a really nice 240Hz display. And on top of that, it is actually priced very competitively if the price ends up close to the MSRP. And even though there are a couple of things that I don't like about this laptop, like the webcam position, the lack of proper performance profiles, the lack of some faster ports, I would still say these are not really serious deal breakers in my opinion. So if you don't care about those things and you just want a great performing gaming laptop, this is definitely the one to look out for. Now, that's it for today. I genuinely hope that you enjoyed this video and learned something about this laptop today. If you're interested in a back-to-back comparison of this laptop with the 15G, let me know in the comments down below and I'll make sure to make that video. Until then, make sure you're subscribed to Tech Testers to never miss an upload. Bye guys, and see you in the next one.